Okay, Baruch Hashem, we are learning Parsha Truma 5782. Today's class is sponsored anonymously. The learning of Torah should be a zchut for the person who's sponsoring and for all of us, for only good things. And we should only hear good news, Besorot Tovot, on all fronts. Today's Parsha, besides the interesting time of the year, besides it being Rosh Chodesh Adar, first of Adar, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, we should have joy. But also, it's important to remember that because it is a leap year, therefore the period of time that's called Shovavim, which usually ends with Mishpatim, with last week's Parsha, this period of time when we focus on, especially the laws, reviewing the laws of sensuality and those sorts of topics, holiness, shalom bayit, purity, these sorts of ideas. We're also going to continue on a leap year into the next two parshiot, which is Truma and Tetzaveh. So it's called Shovavim Tat, as it's often called. So it's an interesting parsha to begin with. In a few weeks, it's going to be even more interesting when it's kind of reviewed. But we're all of a suddenly, and we talked about this last year in quite some detail, suddenly from the Mishpatim, from the laws, all of a sudden now we're build this place. And it's all these details, the sizes and materials and everything. And it becomes a little overwhelming. And there's a lot of, one of the reasons for that is because there's a lot of symbolism to it. But it's not an extra thing. What we have to understand is that, as the Ramban says in his introduction to the Chumash Shemot that we're learning, is that all of it leads into this Geula period, this time when the Shekhinah dwells amongst the Jewish people. And to make that happen, we have to do something. And we're given at least the symbolic ideas of how it was done in the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle that traveled with the Jewish people in the desert. That being said, we have to try to understand it as best we can, obviously. And Baruch Hashem, we have hundreds of years and more of commentary to try to help us understand what all of these things mean. In fact, to begin with, I think it's important to see if there's any symbolism at all. Is there any symbolism, or is it just we just do it because we're told to do it? So let's look at a possible beginning of an answer from the famous Nehama Leibowitz. So this is a much longer piece. It's several pages that I've copied for you here, as you can see, if you can see. But it's actually a longer piece than this, and I'm starting sort of in the middle. So based on a theory that the number 7 is somehow representative of something in Judaism, the Mora, Nehama Leibowitz, tells us the number 7 has special significance in the Torah. The verb make, asa, recurs 7 times in the story of creation. In the creating of the world, also took 7 days. The same verb recurs 200 times in the story of the tabernacle. So asa, make. There's a lot of making going on. 200 versus 7. Can we discover any deliberate correspondence? One moment. Can we discover any deliberate correspondence between the human making in the tabernacle and the divine making in Genesis? Let us compare the two types of making as they're phrased in the respective texts. So back in Genesis, in the Bereshit, it said, Sheshet yamim asa Hashem et hashamayim ve'et haaretz et hayam ve'et kol asher ba'am ve'anach bayom hashvi'i. For in 6 days Hashem made the heaven and the earth, the sea and all that's in them, and rested on the 7th day. So we have the word asa, right? So asa Hashem et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. A study of the story of the tabernacle will reveal a correspondence to this text. The tabernacle and its appurtenances, which means its pieces, were made by human agency, but strictly in accordance with the pattern which Moses was shown on the mountain. This fact is repeated on a number of occasions. Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. You see the word aslu being used there. K'chol asher ani mareh otcha. Everything that I showed you at tavnit mishkan v'et tavnit kol kelav. Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them according to all that I show thee, the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of the furniture thereof, even so shall you make it. And then it says, say bahar. Do is according to the pattern that I showed you on the mountain. The whole process of the tabernacle's construction, with its curtains, boards, poles, is once again summed up with these words: "Hakimota et hamishkan kemishpato asher hareita bahar." You're going to build this Mishkan like I showed you on the mountain. Same phrase over and over and over again. Like I showed you on the mountain, like I showed you on the mountain. What is all this showing going on? So the word shown, which occurs so many times in the Hebrew, the hofal or passive causative form of the verb to see, this causing to see, repeated with respect to Moshe, with all the foregoing 3 verses, are designed to show us how deeply this great vision, the sight of the pattern of the tabernacle, penetrated Moshe's mind, enabling him to translate it into reality. He was shown it in such depth, in such clarity, such clarkite, that he knew exactly what to do when it came to actually making it. I was just, an aside here, just to give you an idea. I was driving around along the freeway today, not so long ago, and I saw this weird truck with a weird hose attachment, and people working around it, and the hose was on the edge of the side, on the edge of the freeway, doing something there in the side, and I was thinking to myself, it's amazing. Somebody from the city, probably, right, drove by and saw a problem or was told about a problem and knew which truck, which kind of hose to call to fix that particular problem, right? There's all kinds of trucks, thousands of different trucks with thousands of different attachments and everything else. And you have to kind of know what you're doing. If I was walking by and saw like a crack on the freeway, or I don't know, a spillage or whatever it is that they saw, some sort of disforming of whatever, I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know I wouldn't even know where to begin. I wouldn't even know what number to call, right? So here, somebody knows their job so well, they have it in their mind, they know what to do. Right? They know which lever to push, which call to make, which truck to use. That was Moshe, right? Moshe was the pattern and the design and the construction of the Mishkan was so clear to him because of what he was shown on the mountain, that when he came back down to tell the people what to do, he knew what had to be done. He knew exactly what, which kind of color should be used with which kind of thread, with which kind of tool, where's supposed to be gold, what's supposed to be shittim wood, everything. Where and when was Moses shown this pattern? Above, we cited a verse that was before before our quote. Cited a verse in which in the Hebrew impresses itself on our memory by the internal rhyme: "View and do after the pattern shown on the mount." The vision the question where is answered on the mount. But we are not told when he was shown and summoned up the mountain to witness the vision. But we may discover the answer to this problem after studying the paragraphs preceding and leading up to the tabernacle at the end of Mishpatim. So now she's going to be quoting Mishpatim, the Shvi, the last Aliyah in Mishpatim, where it talks about the glory of Hashem was on the mountain, and there's a cloud that covered it for 6 days, and 7 days he called to Moshe to come up into the cloud. And Moshe entered and into the midst of the cloud. In the 6th day, the Lord made heaven and earth. The actual making of, that's a typo there. The actual making of the tabernacle and its furnishings he trusted to man. Its design or pattern God similarly made in 6 days. On the 7th day, he called to Moses, and Moses was shown the design of the tabernacle and its furnishings on the mount. We shall note yet further correspondence between the 2 stories of creation of the tabernacle. Let us compare 2 verses from the end of the creation story, which with 2 taken from the end of the tabernacle narrative, and note the results. So now she's going to compare 2 different verses from two different places, and basically, what she says is that the two are obviously, there's some sort of correspondence. In other words, the making of the Mishkan was supposed to be, in some ways, a conclusion of the making of the world. It's that important. And it's the humans, the people are doing it. Which people? People who know the Mishpatim, people who got the 10 Commandments. Those people are the ones who are going to now finish the world by making this Mishkan. You know, it's interesting. I don't have it here, but I believe it's the Netziv in his commentary, Hamek Davar, on in the beginning, in his introduction to Shemot, tells us that the Sefer Shemot isn't always called Sefer Shemot. There's Chazal that says Sefer Geula, the different names for what we call now Shemot, which even in English isn't called names, it's called Exodus. But Chazal had different names for it. One of the names mentioned in the Gemara is Sefer Hasheni. It doesn't have a name. It's like the second book. Why the second book? So it says in the Tziv, because it is not a unique book. It doesn't have anything in it that the other book previous didn't have. It's a continuation of Bereshit. Bereshit is the creation of the world, and this book is the finishing of the creation of the world, because the last piece, the cherry on top of the cake of creation is the Mishkan. Therefore, it's important to know that indeed that's the correspondence that Nahama Leibowitz is trying to make, and she does it in many different ways. I encourage you to look over that commentary in your free time. I have, like I said, quite a bit of it there, and that's one way to at least get started in learning the parsha of Teruma, which is all about the building of the Mishkan, is to understand what the Mishkan is. Mishkan is not just a building; it's not just a tent. It is the creation of the world. It's the end of creation of the world. It's an important thought, and we need to sort of have that in mind as we read the rest of it. So the parsha begins. Let's look at chapter 25, verse 2. It says, "The Ber el bnei Yisrael v'ikchuli truma." Talk to the children of Israel and tell them to bring for me truma, which we're going to call gifts for now. Me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo, from every man who's basically inspired in his heart to do so. Tiku et trumati. Take for me my truma, my gift. Now, the obvious question Rashi is going to deal with is, why does Hashem ask for Truma to be given to him? Whose is it? He says so at the end, Tiku et Trumati, give me my gift. It's Hashem's. What isn't Hashem's? I'll give you a quick answer. Nothing. Everything is Hashem. Hashem owns everything. Moha Oretz Kavodo. Everything in the world is his. So what? Give me a gift from my gifts? That's like telling a kid, you've been to birthday parties and there's gifts on top of the table, right? So you come up to the kid at the end of the party and say, "Hey kid, give me one of those gifts," and he gives it to you, and then you give it back to him. Like, here's the gift you just gave me from your gifts. Like, whose gift is it? All right. So this is a question that Rashi asks, and so his answer is obviously everything belongs to Hashem. So v'yikuli truma, get for me truma, means li, for me, means lishmi, for the sake of my name, not for any other kavanah, not for any other intent. The whole point of the truma is that they should be able to focus on the fact that what they do is for me, for Hashem, not for themselves, not to be comfortable, not to be healthy, wealthy, wise, not to be rich, not to have a nice community, whatever their kavanah is for why they do the mitzvot that they do. I want them to do this mitzvah completely for me. It has to be without any other possible intent. It has to be completely lishmi, for my sake alone. Even if it's bad for them, they'll do it because it's for me. It's not about them. Sometimes it's important to take yourself out of the equation, right? You're at you're at a simcha, for instance, you're at a chatana, God willing, right? And you're upset about how something's going. So are you going to go complain to the chatan, to the kala? I hope not. It's their day. Take yourself out of this. You don't like how something's done. Try to fix it yourself or ignore it, all right? Or leave if you have to. But definitely don't disturb the joy that's supposed to be felt by the chatan and kala. That was interesting. All right, so that's what Rashi says. So it's the mitzvot are for my sake. So let's continue. So says the that's curious. Why don't I have this? I was going to then bring up the Gur Aryeh. The Gur Aryeh, I thought I had. Since I didn't put it in here, I apologize. I'll try to fix that in the future. So the Gur Aryeh is the Maharal's commentary on Rashi. So he writes that what's Rashi dealing with? Why does he have to say Lishmi for my sake? Because as we said, everything belongs to Hashem, as we were saying. So obviously, it can't mean that Hashem is saying take this from somewhere else, from my stuff. Everything is Hashem's stuff. So that's the response of why Rashi says this. And basically, what I said out without quoting the Gur Aryeh as I should have. All right. Next, let's skip 2 verses to Chaf Hey Daled. By the way, today's class is going to be very chapter 25 heavy. Now, most of the commentaries are going to be on chapter 25, which is normal. There's a lot to say about it. It's worthy of study. In fact, all the comments today are chapter 25. All right. So next comment is about the material. Right, the material that's used for the Mishkan says you're supposed to bring blue, purple, crimson yarn, fine linen, goat's hair. And says Rashi, we're not going to get into this discussion too much, but tchelet he defines as tzemer tzavua b'dam chilazon. It's this color blood that came from a fish known as the chilazon, or mollusk, according to some opinions. V'tzivo yarok, and its color was green. So yarok usually green, unless you want to translate it as blue. The Gemara Menachot talks about it. We're not going to get into right now the current argument about whether or not we know what tchelet is. Okay, big to do that I don't want to get involved in right now. By the way, it's not clear from Rashi what exactly is yarok, right? Something is yarok, either the blood of this fish or mollusk, or the fish or mollusk itself. Something is green, or unless you want to translate it as blue. Either way, let's keep going. Then there's argaman. It says sever savua mimin seva shishmo argaman. It's just it's a color that comes from this thing called argaman. That's its name. Sheish is oh good, cute. You see Sapphire translated yarok as greenish blue. Okay, that's all right. That's cute. You don't have to debate. You can just agree with both. That way, it's green and blue. All right. Anyway, very nice. So the argaman is this red purple. It's a wool colored in this material. Sheish is also argaman, by the way, and it's called linen. The izim is goat's hair, and as we said before, it's not the goat itself; it's the material from the goat's hair. Asks Rav Shimon Schwab. Cheles, Amra, Tzemer. He quotes basically what it's a color according to Rashi. Kedivrei Rashi kan Tzemer Tzavua B'dam Kilazon, and Argaman is a Tzemer Tzavua, and Argaman is a color Tolat Shani, and the the different materials are wool and goat's hair, which is also wool. So what's going on here? So it says, it says, Kan Haven Shoel Ma Zeh Shelo Katva HaTorah Befirush Tzemer. So all of these are different kinds of tzemer. These are all different kinds of wool and dyes for this particular material. So why not just say so? It sounds like you're asking me for different things. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, and these aren't different things. These are all part of one thing, right? They're all going to come into the color of this thing that we're coloring. It sounds like the Torah is separating them to three different kinds of things, three different species. They're not. Hello, kulum tzemahem arak they're all really just one thing. Why is the Torah to make it sound from the verse as if we're talking about all kinds of different things? Why is the Torah calling Pishtan Shesh? Al Shem Hashizhira Velo Shmo Ha'ikri V'chein Ha'izim Kavana Notza Al Ha'izim Velo Kativ Shar Ha'izim Sa'ar Ha'izim Velo Davaru. The Torah is acting very strange here, says Rav Schwab in Mayan Beit HaShoeva. Why is it doing that? Hina Yedua Shala Kol Davar Yesh Chomer V'Tzura. So here's where his answer comes in. I need you to concentrate a little bit to understand this. Everything has a choma and a tzura. Let's call it a form and a function. Okay? Etzel Re'ita B'nei Adam Hatzura Tefel L'Chachomer V'Sha'ikar Hatzemer Rak L'Shitzavua B'Tzeva Tchelet or Argaman. And what's the main thing? Is the main thing the shape of something or its function? What matters more? So actually, sometimes it depends, right? If you want, if you want the tires on your car to function right, the most important thing is that they be round. If they're not round, they're not going to function. Not well anyway, not effectively. All right. So he says, so when it comes to things like this, are we talking about the function of the thing, the physical function of the thing, or are we talking about its shape? And this gets complicated because, well, we're not really sure what the most important thing is. All we know is that Hashem told us to make it, right? And it's supposed to be somehow to create a sort of spirituality. Now, is the shape of the thing, the color of the thing so important? Or is its function, like the fact that you can use it, it covers something, it keeps something warm, or it beautifies something? Is that more important? So it depends. So he continues, he concludes, when it comes to holiness, in certain things, when it comes to holiness, really the most important thing is the tzura, the shape of something is more important than its actual functionality. Like how for example, let's take another example outside the realm of Mishkan for a moment. An easy example is tefillin. Okay, tefillin have to have a certain kind of shape, right? They have to have that shape. What if that shape is not convenient for whoever's wearing it for whatever reason? I don't know. They have a bruise on top of their head. I don't know, right? So or whatever. So either they can't do the mitzvah, they might be patur from the mitzvah of tefillin, or they don't wear tefillin. or they put it on and are inconvenienced somehow. But you don't change the shape of the tefillin to suit you, because in the area of kedusha, for whatever reason, the size of the tefillin matters, the shape matters, the material used matters, what's inside them matters, everything matters, right? It is a real matter, right? And everything's important, and you can't just at a whim decide what you want things to be. That's in the area of kedusha. That's not necessarily true in the area of physicality. In the physical world, we adjust things. The building's not big enough, you can make it bigger. Extend the walls, break down a wall or a pillar if you can, and don't do it if it's dangerous. Obviously, get the city's permission first. So all of that is part of being practical. But when it comes to kedusha, practicality is not the main thing. The main thing is doing it the way it is said to have to be done, right? It's think of it as, at worst case scenario. Let's say you don't understand the mitzvah and you're not comfortable with the mitzvah, et cetera, et cetera. Worst case scenario, think of it as a hoop you have to jump through, right? Just like there are certain papers you have to fill out to graduate college, or whatever you have to do, right? Certain documents you have to sign, certain licenses you needed to get. All of these are just really, you have to do them. You don't have a choice. Did you complain? Maybe. Did you do them? Well, if you got your degree or whatever it is you were trying to get, you did it. So worst case scenario. And of course, when I say worst case scenario, it's because I know that there are levels and levels of understanding mitzvot and really appreciating them. And it's obviously best to appreciate them, but most important thing is to do them. To quote a former president, get her done. You have mitzvot, and we got to get her done. We have to make them happen. And ideally, and it's very possible, especially nowadays, it's so much Torah out there on the internet and books and new books being published every single day. There's so many ways to learn more about mitzvot and appreciate mitzvot. And I don't think anybody has an excuse anymore to not know why. I don't know the reason for this mitzvah. I don't think there's an excuse for that anymore, unless you really don't want to know. But even if you don't know it, you still have to do it. Why? Because Hashem said to do it. And end of the conversation? No. But the bottom line is you have to do it. Hopefully, best case scenario, you know why and you're doing it right. And the worst case scenario, you're doing it nevertheless. That's one way to look at it. And again, an unfortunate way to look at it, but still true. All right. We're going to skip to 25:10. Chafei pasuk yud. Vasu Aron atzei shitim amatayim v'chetzi arko v'amachetzi rachbo v'ama v'chetzi komato. So we're talking about building the Aron, the famous lost ark that Indiana Jones obviously found. It's a true story, right? Anyway, so in the actual true story, by the way, we have very little idea of what the Aron actually looked like. There's a lot of machloket and everything else. We're not going to get into that right now. The Ibn Ezra, for instance, says the Aron had legs, right? It's like a table. It had legs, but not what you pictured at all, right? Vasu Aron, and he gets that from the verses, by the way, his understanding of the psukim themselves. Anyway, we're not going to get into that right now. But anyway, the command is to make this Aron atzei shitim. It's made out of shitim wood. Amatayim v'chetzi arko, 2.5 amot, which you're going to translate as about 2 feet or so, right? An amma is about 2 feet approximately, just to make it simple for us. So 2.5 amot is the length. So that's 2 times 2.5 is oh my gosh, 5. Yeah. So 5 feet long, a cubit and a half wide. So that's 3 feet wide. So it's a 3 by 5. The Aron, not very big, right? And the same is the height. The height is also about 3 feet. So it's 5 by 3, 3 feet height. That's all we know about the Aron so far. The question is, did I say an Amma is 2 feet? Oh my gosh, I'm totally doing this wrong. All this math is all wrong. Forget it. Oh my gosh. Anyway, whatever it is. So whatever it is, it's 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5. And the question that we're going to deal with in 2 different commentaries right now is why all these halves? Now, you might notice, and the Kli Yakar is going to point this out in a moment, you might notice that that indeed not all the items in the Mishkan have the same measurements, right? Some things have whole measurements, some things have a combination of whole and half measurements. But when it comes to the Aron is all in half measurements, 1.5, 2.5. There's a lot of halves, to have and have not. Why is it in halves? So he starts his commentary very humbly saying, like, in all this stuff, there's all these dinim, all these pratim, all these halachot, and there's so many Talmidei Chachamim who commented on this. And this is, by the way, this is the Kli Yakar writing in Prague about 500 years ago after the Maharal, right? He was, I think, a student of the Maharal. So he's definitely a student or not. He was definitely the next generation of Talmidei Chachamim in the city of Prague. And he says, Rashi said everything that there's already to say on this, and all the other commentaries already said everything. I've got nothing really new to add. But I have a question, he says. What's my question? So he says, there's 3 things in the Mishkan. The Gemara says it in Yuma Ayin Bet Amud Bet. So so 72b. It says there, Shehem Keneged Gimel Ktarim. There are 3 things that have 3 crowns. Right? There's 3 things in the Mishkan that have crowns, and those 3 things are Keneged, are references to the idea that we have that there are 3 kinds of crowns in the world: Keter Torah, Keter Kahuna, and Keter Malchut. It's also mentioned Pirkei Avot, right? So Keter Torah is the crown of Torah, somebody who learns Torah for a living, right? Learns Torah day and night. So that person wears a symbolic crown. Kahuna, Keter Kahuna is somebody who's born a Kohen and acts like a Kohen, wears the crown of Kahuna. And Keter Malchut, somebody who becomes a leader. So that person has this crown, has a crown of royalty. Again, symbolic. Obviously, nobody has to literally wear a crown. It would be kind of outrageous nowadays. Actually, nowadays probably not. I take that back. So he says all these 3 things in the Mishkan that have crowns are symbolic of those things. So, for example, the Aron, since it had the luchot inside of it, it's representative of the Torah. So that's the Keter Torah, right? The Mizbeach had a crown around it. The altar, who used the altar? The Kohanim. So that's the Keter Kahuna. The Shulchan, which represented the wealth and the sharing of the Jewish people's resources, that's supposed to be led by the leader, by the government, by the king. That's the Keter Malchut. So all of these different Ketarim that are on these items are also representative of the actual crowns that are, I shouldn't say actual, on the symbolic crowns that these people wear. Therefore, now we're getting into the question. Therefore, we need to know why all of these things have different kinds of crowns. So, for example, right, we talked about the sorry, not crowns, measurements. So this Aron, which we're talking about, has these half measurements. It's symbolic of Torah. So why would that be halves? The Shulchan has halves and whole, and the Keter Malchut, the Mizbeach, has only whole measurements, no halves at all. So he says, and he says this in very powerful language. Let's see if I can find the best place to quote from here. So he says all these three things also represent different areas of life. There's the physical aspect of life, there's the spiritual aspect of life, and there's the sort of in between. I'll explain. The Torah represents spirituality. It's given to us by Hashem as a way to lift us up from this physical existence and live a holy life. So he says that's why, of all things, the Aron is given half measurements. Because the half measurements represent the fact that we're not fully there yet. We're not fully spiritual, for better or for worse. So it's not a judgment call here. Right? We're not fully spiritual yet. We'll get there. We can aim towards it, but we're not completely spiritual. And we should always strive to be doing more. We can always do more with the spirituality. I think I believe it's Rabbi Frand has what's one of his book titles. It's never enough. It's never too much. It's never something. That's what's one of his books. You've never fully reached spirituality, and that's probably, in a sense, a good thing, right? Because if we were completely spiritual, we would basically be souls and not bodies. So we have what to work with, and we have a world to enjoy, but we're also not 100% there yet. And the fact that we're not completely spiritual means that we're sort of not halves. We're not fully complete yet. And therefore, that's what's represented by the Aron, and that's what's represented by the half measurements. It's not fully there. We're learning Torah, we're trying to grow, right? We go to classes, even during our lunchtime series, sometimes, whatever it is. And nevertheless, we're not 100% spiritual. We can try, and we should keep trying, but we're not 100% there, and that's okay. I think the Oznaim LaTorah says something different, but I think it's, in a sense, something that might be complementary. No, it's not entirely. So this is a long piece of the Kli Yakar here. Not entirely what the Kli Yakar says, but at the same time, I think it can be used in concert with each other. The Oznaim LaTorah also quotes this piece, Amma V'chetzi, Makshim Lama Ha'amot Shel Aron Kulam Shvurot. Why are all of the measurements of the Aron incomplete, halves? Ukvar Ba'arnu, so he gives an explanation he already gave. And then he says like this. V'im yesh l'chatzim elu ramazim az hayoter mitkabel al halevhu. And if you really want to if you want to put into your heart another, intent, what we're trying to learn here, Sherames HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Sheba'aron Munachat Rak HaTorah HaKtuva. What's inside the Aron? The written Torah, the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah, the Luchot, right? And what is that? Hachetzi mitzotav. V'yesh Torah shebichtav. It's only half of the Torah. It's actually a much smaller half if you're gonna, in terms of measurement, right? The oral law is so much greater. Like I said, all these new books being published every single day. It's a continuation of the oral law, right? It's endless. It's infinite. You can keep going on and on and on forever. The Rambam's halacha wasn't enough. The Tur wasn't enough. The Shulchan Aruch wasn't enough. The Shach, Taz, Ramah, that wasn't enough. And the Mishnah Berurah wasn't enough. The Aruch HaShulchan wasn't. Now we have all these books on individual halachot. That's not enough. We have new books about the halacha is endless. Give me one moment. Sorry about that. That's one of the problems of having a class in the middle of the day. All right, Baruch Hashem. It's all good. Okay, so so in other words, those 9 Menorahs is telling us that why is the Aron in halves? Because the Aron is only half of the Torah. It contains in it the written Torah, not the oral Torah, right? It's only chetzi. V'yesh o Torah shebichtav. There's also Torah shebichtav. B'la'ida haTorah hamunachat ba'aron kishvura. It's as if the Torah that's laying inside the Aron is incomplete. It's only half because we don't have obviously the oral Torah inside there, and then that makes it so that there is an incomplete Torah, and that's why the measurements of the Aron are also therefore incomplete. So I think this is me going on a limb here, but like I said, I think these two opinions can go in concert with each other. Because what did the Kli Yakar say? It's half because we're not really there yet. We're we're not completely spiritual. And what did the Uznayim the Torah say? It's half because it doesn't include the Torah shebichtav. So it doesn't include the Torah Shebal Peh. How can these be used together? It's the Torah Shebal Peh that makes us completely spiritual. In other words, yes, correct, Kli Yakar, you're right. We're not there yet. But how can we get there? It's the Torah. From the Torah Shebal Peh lets us grow spiritually more and more, so that eventually we can make this entire world a spiritual reality. I think the two can go together, and I think there's a lot to say on the topic. But for now, because we want to keep going, we have 2 more comments to make in the next 15 minutes or so. We can do this. I believe in us. All right. So next piece. We're still talking about the Aron, obviously, because we're still in chapter 25. And in the Aron, it says, "B'tabaot ha'aron yiyu habadim." This Aron has in it rings, right? And tabaot, right? And they're on the Aron. Let's assume they're on 2 sides of the Aron. Not going to get into other opinions for now. So they're on 2 sides of the Aron, rings. And inside those rings, yiyu habadim, there's poles. And it talks about those poles. They're made from shittim wood. They're covered in gold. And then the most important halacha of all, lo yasuru mimenu. You can't take them out. Okay, no problem. Make a box. Put rings on the sides of them. Stick poles into those rings. And don't you ever take those poles out again. Why not? You made rings to put poles into. You could have attached the poles to the box, but somehow you wanted to make rings, and then these removable poles that you shall not ever remove. Don't even think about it. Taking these poles out, completely not allowed. Asur. Death penalty. Whatever. Why? So answers are one of our favorite go-to commentaries, the Meshech Chochmah. Very, very important idea. He starts by quoting the Rambam on a completely other topic. Completely other topic. He mentions that we know, if you recall, maybe we don't know, talks about the Menorah. And the Menorah has obviously lights, right? And it says there, it's lahadlik hanerot gam bayom shezehu bichlal tevat hanerot l'dideha. When are you lighting the menorah? In the daytime. Why? Why are you lighting the menorah in the daytime? It's to show you that the lighting of the candles is not about light. We're not just trying to light up the Mishkan, light up the Beit HaMikdash so we can see what we're doing. It's not just a fancy chandelier, okay? The reason why we like the menorah even in the daytime, especially in the daytime, is because the lighting of the menorah was part of the service of the Mishkan, part of the service of the Beit HaMikdash, not because of the light. So you light it in the daytime to show you, to prove to you that it's not for the light. In other words, you light the menorah in the daytime, again, just to make this very clear, because how are we even talking? Why are we talking about menorahs now? The menorah is later on in the parsha, which we're not even going to get to in today's class. So why are you lighting the menorah in the daytime? To show you, to make it very clear to you that the menorah's lighting is part of the service. It's not about having light. It's about having the menorah lit. K'mo she'amru Zal, as the rabbis tell us, Chilukoro hu tzarich chulei, le'orot ki hu ein tzarich le'ayir, rak shezeh chok. It's not because of the light of the menorah, it's because it's a chok. You have to light it. The tai hu tzarich lehadlik gam bayom. That's why it has to be lit in the day. You walk by the Mishkan, you walk by the Beit HaMikdash, halavai someday soon. We're going to walk by the Beit HaMikdash, you're going to see the menorah lit. In the daytime, you're like, it's not providing light for anybody. And that's exactly the point. It's not supposed to provide light. It's supposed to be a mitzvah to light the menorah, and that's why you specifically do it in the daytime. Therefore, says the Meshech Chochmah, let's go further. Ve'ein habadim lasod oto shehu noseh et atzmo. It's not the badim that were used for carrying the Aron, but really, says the Gemara in Sota on page 35, it said, it nosa et atzmo. The Aron carried itself. The Leviim who carried it were just symbolically lifting it up, symbolically carrying it on their shoulders or whatever. Really, it carried them. It went on its own. It was miraculous. V'chein tziva ki habadim bal yisuru mimenu leorot k'mo she'ein inyan lehabadim be'et sheyoto munach be'ohel moed. The point of the badim was not for the point of these poles was not to carry the Aron then. And that's exactly why you couldn't take them out of the poles, because you wanted them to be there all the time, just like you wanted the menorah to be lit all the time to show that the light of the menorah was not the important thing. Therefore, also, when it comes to the badim, to the poles of the Aron, the poles were not for carrying the Aron. The poles were there. The poles were there for to show you that it was not for carrying the Aron. They were not useful for carrying the Aron. Otherwise, they would have been removable, and they would have been removed and put in to carry the Aron. But when you walked by and you saw the Aron, of course, it was unlikely that you'd walk by and see the Aron. I'm not going to get into that right now. But so if you were to see the Aron, you'd see the poles there, and you'd say, why are the poles there? The poles aren't put in there to carry it. The poles are always there to show you that it's not for carrying them. It's not for carrying the Aron. The Aron traveled miraculously. And the fact that these badim, that these poles were always on the Aron, shows that the Aron carried itself and didn't need the poles. Just like the menorah doesn't need darkness to be lit. It needs to be lit, period, whether it's dark or not. And especially if it's not dark, that's when you lit the menorah. So too, the badim were always on the Aron, whether or not you were carrying it, because the badim weren't used for carrying the Aron, because the Aron carried itself. That's the Meshech Chochmah. Beautiful piece. In other words, just to just to emphasize the point a little bit. This idea, and I'm certain you've heard this before. I mean, this Gemara in Sota that the Aron carried itself is kind of, I'm scared to use the phrase, but it's kind of famous. Right? A lot of people know you're not supposed to. The Aron was not. They carried itself. It carried the people who carried it, etc., etc. That's the Gemara. It's quite well known. Rashi mentions it, etc. What the Meshech Chochmah just did, though, was he made it not that it's not. He didn't just prove that makes sense. He didn't just prove that that's what actually happened. It says nothing else makes sense. Why else wouldn't you have the? Why else would you have these poles in these rings that are removable that you can't remove? They had to be teaching us a lesson. So just like there's a lesson in the menorah being lit in the daytime, and that's the menorah was not for illumination. So too, the badim, that's their purpose. The purpose of the badim, the purpose of the poles was to show that they had no purpose. They were not for physical use. They're not for physical labor. Their purpose, the poles' purpose, were to show the Jewish people that the Aron carried itself and didn't need human help, and that the human effort that we put into carrying it was more than anything else was for the purpose of symbolism, of showing that we're doing our part and Hashem does the rest, as is true for many things. All right, last piece that we have time for today, I think, chapter 25, still, as promised, verse 31, and here's where we start talking about the menorah, as promised. It says, "V'asita menorah zahav tahor, miksha ta'aseh ha-menorah yirecha, v'kana gibieha, kaftoreha, ufracheha, mimena iyu. V'asita menorah zahav tahor, make the menorah out of pure gold." Out of pure gold. Miksha ta'aseh ha-menorah. It should be miksha, means it should be hammered out. In other words, you shouldn't just like attach from different pieces of gold. It should be one piece of gold that you're chiseling out the shape of the menorah, as according to the the vision that Moshe saw that we talked about earlier. Yerecha uktana. Sorry, Yerecha ukana. Its base and its shaft. Gibieha, its cups, kaftoreha, its decorations, ufracheha, there's like a little fruits or almond tree, almond petals, whatever you want to call it, on the thing. Mimena you, and it should all come from that same piece. So this giant chunk of gold needed to be hammered out till you had this perfect shape with all the details that are in the other psukim that I'm not quoting here. And a famous question that Rashi asks, it says ta'aseh ha-menorah. So it says make a menorah twice in this verse. It says asita menorah zahav tahor, make the word asa, like Mrs. Leibowitz, Mora Leibowitz told us before. Asita, make this menorah, and then later on in the verse, about 6 words later, it says ta'aseh ha-menorah. The menorah should be made. And what that phraseology, the grammar there, ta'aseh as opposed to va'asita, means it should be made. What do you mean it should be made? Why aren't you saying make again? It should be asita menorah yirecha. Why does it say ta'aseh? It should be made. The menorah should be made. Make it? It should be made. In the same verse, you have the 2 different phrases for the same thing. What's going on? So Rashi says, ta'aseh ha-menorah, the menorah should be made. Me'aleha means it's passive here. It should be made. You guys know the difference between passive and active language, right? Right. Usually when the government doesn't want to take credit for something, right? When it, like, for instance, raises taxes, it doesn't say, I decided to raise your taxes. It says, it was decided. When you use helping verbs like was, right? What you're doing is you're using passive language. You're making it like you're not doing it. Somebody else did it. Your taxes were raised. By whom? By what magical entity raised my taxes? Oh, that sort of thing. So that's the idea. When it does something that's not that they know you're not going to be happy with, they try to use passive language. It's sort of an immediate trick that's actually quite ancient. Plato writes about it too, in the Republic. But we're not going to get into all that right now. All right. Anyway, in this case, the menorah should be made. Should be made by whom? Which magical entity is going to make our menorah? Me. I thought I was making it. Asita, you said you make the menorah. And now you're saying it should be made. So Rashi says it's passive. Why? Moshe mitkashaba. Moshe, this is, I'm sure some of you already remember learning this. Moshe was confused by this. He had a kasha. He was confused. How do you do it? He saw all these shapes, the shape of the this and the that and the almond petal cups and bowls. How am I going to make this out of a chunk of gold? So Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashlech et hakikar l'ur, throw this giant piece of gold into the melting pot, into the fire. Vihina sita me'aleha, and there will be a magical entity, me, God. I'll make the menorah. You just throw in the gold. And that's why it says ta'aseh. It will be made. It means you're not going to actually make it. The menorah was not made by people. It was made by Hashem himself. All the people did was to throw this giant chunk of gold into the fire. So asks the Svat Emet. Ask the Svat Emet. That's nice. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for telling me how to make this menorah, and then don't make it, I'll make it for you. What's going on? Hashem doesn't do that usually. What's going on? Ultimately, who made it? Tiksha Moshe Menorah Ralu Hashem Yitbarach Achar Kein Ktiv Shasita Atzmo. So Hashem made it. Taseh, and then he says make it, and then it says it will be made. Im Kain Lama Haralo. Why is he showing it to him? Why did he show him the menorah only to confuse? God knows what's going on. God knows what's going to happen. He knows the future. He knows what Moshe knows and what Moshe doesn't know. Why is he confusing him with this image of the beautiful menorah? And then he says, no, forget it about it. I'll do it. Did he change his mind? What we're learning is an important lesson in the desire that a person can have in their heart and in their soul. Nigma hashar. Ma sha'al yedei la'asot nasa atzmo. V'zeh ma shekatuv hashlech le'ur chule. Ken hu b'chol mitzvah b'chol ish Yisrael. Just like, says the Sfat Emet, just like this particular mitzvah was shown to Moshe, but the end conclusion, the end result came from Hashem. So he says it's true not just for Moshe and the Menorah, but for every single mitzvah and for every single Jew. Just like we said earlier, you need to strive to do things better, to try to do the best you can. We're only halfway there. We're not, our spirituality is not complete. We said that, but we should still keep trying. Why not just give up? We're not there. We're 20, 30, 70 years old, and we tried to be spiritual, and we're not there. So give up already. Spend your day at the beach. It's not going to happen. Says Sfat Emet, no. You're not getting this. B'chol mitzvah, b'chol ish Yisrael, ki b'vadai ein b'koach adam la'asot ritzono yitbarach. It's not within our strength to do Hashem's will completely. Rakifi ratzon ha'adam, the ratzon, your desire, nigmar me'atzmo, has to come from within. Mikol makom hagamar ba gam kein al yidei ratzon adam. The completion is not going to come completely from you. It's going to come from your ratzon. It's going to come from your desire. That's why he showed him. He wanted to show him what the end conclusion is, so that Moshe will want it. I want that menorah. I want to be able to build that menorah. I can't. I don't know how, but I know what it is. I can see it. I see the vision. I understand what it's supposed to look like, but I don't know how to do it. So because he wanted to do the ratzon of Hashem, and then it actually did come from him. It didn't come from Hashem alone. It came from Moshe's ratzon. It came from Moshe's desire to make the menorah. Hashem said, "Throw that chunk of gold into the fire, and out will come out a menorah because you want it to. You desire it." And that's one of the most important lessons in Torah. Is if you desire growth, if you desire spirituality, you desire to make things better, Hashem will make it happen. Hashem will make it successful. All you have to do is want to and to try your best. It's not, the conclusion is not going to come from you. You can try and try and try, and then things don't work out. That's because Hashem didn't want it to work out for whatever reason. But if you want it to work out and you try your best, and it's your desire, it's your kavanah, your heart is into it, your soul is into it, you're doing your best, Hashem should bless you, and everybody should be successful in growing in the spirituality, especially during these weeks of Shovavim Tat, continued growth, especially this a beautiful bracha for Adar, for Rosh Chodesh Adar. We should continue Mishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. We should all continue and grow in the proper way of real simcha, not just simcha as a word, but simcha of growth in Torah and mitzvot. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Very good class.
Thank you.